Once upon a time, in a small town on the outskirts of a city, there were four best friends named Emma, Jason, Lily, and Ryan. They were all in high school, and like most teenagers, they were always looking for something exciting and new to do. One day, while browsing through an antique store, they stumbled upon an old Ouija board. The board looked ancient and spooky, with faded letters and numbers on its surface. The friends were intrigued and decided to buy it. That night, they gathered in Emma's basement, eager to try out their new purchase. They turned off the lights, lit some candles, and placed the Ouija board in the middle of the floor. They each placed their fingers on the planchette and waited for something to happen. At first, nothing did. They asked the board if there were any spirits present, but the planchette remained still. They tried again, this time asking if anyone wanted to communicate with them. Still, nothing. Just as they were about to give up, the planchette started to move, slowly at first, then picking up speed. The friends looked at each other in amazement. They had never seen anything like this before. "Who are you?" Jason asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The planchette spelled out the letters C A R O L. "Carol? Is that your name?" Lily asked. The planchette moved again, spelling out Y-E-S. The friends were thrilled. They had made contact with the spirit. They started asking more questions, and Carol answered them all. She told them that she was a young girl who had died in a fire in the same town years ago. The friends felt a mix of fear and excitement. They were talking to a ghost. As the night wore on, the conversation with Carol grew more intense. She started to give them information that only someone who had lived in the town for a long time would know. The friends were convinced that they were really communicating with a spirit, and they were fascinated. But then, things started to take a dark turn. Carol's answers became more cryptic, and she started to talk about things that made the friends uncomfortable. They asked her to leave, but the planchette kept moving, spelling out sinister messages. Suddenly, the candles flickered, and the room grew cold. The friends could feel a presence in the room, something that was not Carol. They tried to move the planchette, but it was like it was glued to their fingers. Just then, they heard a voice. It was low and menacing, and it seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. The friends felt their hearts racing. They had unleashed something they could not control. The voice spoke again, this time louder and more insistent. It told them that it was a demon, and that it had been summoned by their use of a Ouija board. It claimed that it had been waiting for this moment, and it was going to take possession of one of them. The friends were terrified. They tried to move, but they were paralyzed with fear. They watched in horror as the planchette started to move on its own, spelling out words that they could not understand. And then, it stopped. The candles flickered back to life, and the room grew warm again. The friends looked at each other, confused and shaken. They had no idea what just happened. They were too afraid to speak. They quickly gathered the board and the planchette and hid them away, vowing never to use them again. But the memory of that night stayed with them. They could not shake the feeling that they had awakened something dark and malevolent. Months passed, and the four friends tried their best to forget the horrifying experience they had with the Ouija board. They avoided talking about it and tried to move on with their lives. But something about that night lingered, haunting them in their dreams and nagging at the back of their minds. One day, Emma received a package in the mail. It was addressed to her, but there was no return address. She opened it cautiously, unsure of what she might find inside. To her horror, she saw that it was the same Ouija board that they had used that fateful night. Emma's heart raced as she realized that they had never truly gotten rid of the board. Something had found it and sent it back to her, like a macabre gift. She called the others and they agreed to meet at her house that night to destroy the board once and for all. When they arrived, Emma showed them the board and they all felt a chill run down their spines. They knew what they had to do, but none of them wanted to touch it. Finally, Jason mustered up the courage to grab the planchette. But as soon as he touched it, something strange happened. The room grew cold again, and they heard a faint whispering sound. It was like the sound of 100 voices all talking at once, but they could not make out the words. They looked around, but there was no one else in the room. They were alone with the board and whatever spirits it held. Suddenly, the planchette started to move on its own. It spelled out words that made no sense to the friends, and they felt a sense of dread wash over them. They tried to move the planchette away, but it was like stuck to their fingers. It kept moving faster and faster until they could barely keep up. And then, just like before, the room grew cold and they felt the presence in the room. But it was time. It was stronger, more malevolent. The friends could feel it closing in on them like a suffocating fog. They tried to run, but their legs felt heavy, like they were rooted to the ground. They were trapped, at the mercy of the spirits they had unknowingly unleashed. The planchette kept moving, spelling out messages that they could not comprehend. The candles flickered and the air grew thick with the smell of burning sulfur. They could hear strange noises all around them, like footsteps and whispers. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The room was silent and the candles burned low. The friends looked at each other, confused and scared. They had no idea what had just happened, but they knew they had to get rid of the board once and for all. They took it outside, and with trembling hands, they smashed it to pieces. They burned the fragments, hoping that they had destroyed whatever malevolent spirits were attached to the board. They never spoke of the Ouija board again, but the memory of that night stayed with them forever. Years passed, and the friends grew older. They went their separate ways, but they always kept in touch, bound by the experience they had shared. They tried to forget what had happened, but they knew they could never truly escape it. One day, Lily called the others with news. She had been doing some research, and she discovered something shocking. The house where they had used the Ouija board had burned down the same night they had used it. The friends were speechless. They had never known about the fire, and they couldn't believe it was a coincidence. They knew that they had summoned something dark and dangerous that night, and that it had led to the destruction of the house. Lily continued to explain that the fire was ruled as an electrical issue, but she couldn't shake the feeling that it was connected to their experience with a Ouija board. The friends were terrified. They had always suspected that something malevolent had been unleashed that night, but now they had proof. They knew that they had to do something to make amends for what they had done. They decided to hold a seance, hoping to contact the spirits that they had inadvertently summoned. They wanted to apologize and ask for forgiveness, hoping to put an end to the curse that had been hunting them for so long. They gathered in Emma's house, just like they had years before, and they lit candles and held hands. They closed their eyes and focused on the energy in the room, hoping to make a connection. Suddenly, they heard a voice. It was faint at first, but it grew stronger as they listened. It was a woman's voice, and it sounded sad and angry. "Why did you summon me?" the voice asked. The friends were stunned. They had never heard anything like it before. They didn't know what to say, so they just remained silent. "I have been trapped between worlds for so long," the voice continued. "I have been searching for a way to be released, and now you have given me a chance." The friends realized that they had summoned a spirit, that they had been trapped. Unable to move on, they felt a sense of guilt wash over them, knowing that they had caused this spirit to suffer. "We are sorry," they said, all at once. "We didn't know what we were doing. We didn't mean to hurt you." The spirit seemed to soften at their words. "I know you didn't mean to hurt me," she said, "but you did, and now you must help me. You must find a way to release me from this curse." The friends didn't know what to do, but they promised to try. They researched for days, trying to find a way to help the trapped spirit move on. They finally found a ritual that promised to release spirits from their earthly bonds. They gathered at Emma's house again, this time with a priest to guide them through the ritual. They lit candles and chanted, focusing all their energy on freeing the trapped spirit. Suddenly, they felt a rush of energy, like a gust of wind blowing through the room. They heard a sound, like 1,000 voices all speaking at once, and then it was gone. The friends looked around, confused. They didn't know if the ritual had worked or not. And then, just as suddenly, they felt a sense of peace. They knew that a spirit had been released, and that she had finally found her way to the afterlife. They looked at each other, relieved and exhausted. They had finally put an end to the curse that had been hunting them for so long. But even as they celebrated their victory, they knew that they would never forget the lessons they had learned. They knew that the world was full of mysteries and dangers, and that they should always be careful with the power of the unknown. They had learned the hard way that some things were better left alone, and that the consequences of their actions could be far-reaching and profound.